On to this now. Government is unhappy about a decision by SAA's business rescue practitioners to cancel some local and international flights. The state-owned airline entered a form of bankruptcy protection and it's fighting for survival. Well, to unpack developments at SAA, I'm joined by independent aviation expert Ogaga Ujo. Mr. Ujo, thank you very much for making the time to speak to us. I just want to read you a tweet from a concerned South African who was reacting to government's reaction on the cancellation of the flights. And this person is Robert James Hickson, who says, unpaid SAA suppliers should consider approaching the courts for relief because it's now clear that the sole shareholder, which is the ANC government, has no intention of reorganizing SAA to achieve profitability, but more importantly, he adds, it's just using the business rescue process as a ploy to not pay suppliers. Does he have a point?
Look, I mean, I think after the comments this weekend, I understand why people are a bit concerned. But if I can just take a step back and set some context in terms of aviation's value. So Oxford Economics in 2017 updated a study that they'd last done in 2014, where they spoke about the value of aviation for South Africa's economy. At the point in time, it contributed 160 billion rand to the GDP, which represented about 3.5%. And of course, South African Airways Express, and every other airline that operates contributes to that, as well as the supporting industries. I think the business rescue process needs to be respected, first and foremost, because an inherent part of getting into that process is that there is prospect of saving the entity. I was not surprised by the routes that SAA cut. I think it makes commercial sense, just based on the dynamics of the market. If we look at the domestic routes, as an example, 60% of supply in domestic South Africa is operated by low-cost capacity. So SAA, over the last few years, has actually rationalized their domestic supply because of those changes in dynamics. Currently, they sit at about 9%, but the rest of the market, in terms of domestic capacity, is operated by low-cost carriers.
But someone argues on the flip side and says, but do the business rescue practitioners, or should they have cut these routes without tabling first a plan?
So, in terms of the business rescue process, as per Chapter 6 of the Companies Act, it does say that it culminates in a business rescue plan that must be approved by affected persons, which include creditors, shareholders, and employee representatives. I'm not so sure what agreement is in place between, or terms of reference with how they work, but from a commercial perspective, as an independent consultant, it isn't surprising that these decisions were made. What I think was handled poorly, clearly from the conflicting points, is that there wasn't stakeholder management, there wasn't communication. Looking at the domestic market, I'm not surprised. Even some of the regional routes that were cut, for example, you're looking at Sao Paulo and Hong Kong, SAA has mentioned that they're not performing well on Hong Kong for quite some time, and this has been affected also by the political uncertainty. Dropping Sao Paulo and Hong Kong are actually complementary services, so for me, it wasn't such a surprise. I just think the communication leaves a lot to be desired.
What does the law say once the business rescue practitioners take over? Does interference from the shareholder, is that still permissible?
So from my reading of the business rescue section within the Companies Act, it's quite clear that effective management goes to the rescue practitioner. It has to go through a consultative process with various stakeholders, and decisions are made by that practitioner. So I think that it's quite clear, and it's in black and white in terms of what is required and the power that the business rescue practitioner has.
Final question to you. You listened to what the President had to say. We're not happy. He is then seconded by his Minister of Public Enterprises that we are now going to actually seek representations with the business rescue practitioners with the intention of possibly reversing what has been done. Then you have the chairperson of the ANC, that's the governing party, say, sell this thing if it's not making a profit. Do suppliers have a reason to worry in as far as saving this airline is concerned, or should their preoccupation now be about recouping whatever monies are owed to them?
I think the priority for all parties involved should be to let the rescue process continue. Let it be concluded, let the plan be presented, and we can go from there. Because right now we're working with quite a bit of conjecture, but there's a very clear process that needs to be taken.
Ogaga Ujo, thank you very much for making the time to speak to us and for your insights. He is an aviation expert.